Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is sometimes late to the party, but never last to the punch bowl.
Tim Longo. What is that one?
It's two LTTPs.
What?
Late to the party.
Uh-huh.
Last to the punch bowl. Link
Nice.
to the past.
Oh my, are you serious? Are you serious right now? That is something else.
Tim,
wow. How long did it take you?
I have too much time on my hands.
Apparently, I'm scrambling to finish this session, and yeah. Whew, but I do have an inherent advantage, which we'll talk about.
I guess we'll get to that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Anyway.
Yeah, so this was a big chunk of time, and you, like you said, you have an advantage. We'll get to that, but I do not. I'm playing this game on the Wii, and we picked 5 dungeons, and they are of varying difficulty, but overall, I would say increasing difficulty. There's a couple that are easier, so it's not as strict. It's more of an up and down, I guess. But the high point is definitely, for me at least, was in the Ice Palace, which we did last this time. That one took me quite a lot lot
when you say high point, what do you mean?
In terms of difficulty. The most difficult boss. Or even dungeon, actually. So...
Which I haven't finished yet. For full disclosure, Yeah,
you didn't quite get there. Okay, so I want to... I'll just kind of quickly touch on what the bosses are. We can touch on mechanics if we want at that point. So we did the Palace of Darkness, which had the sort of helmeted, fire-breathing lizardy thing.
Oh, yeah, right. With the face mask thing.
Yep.
Yeah, you get the hammer.
Exactly.
I believe, yeah.
Then we got the Swamp Palace, which was like a beholder, basically, with this cloud of fire around it.
Oh, yeah. I totally
pull off with the hook shot.
Oh, I actually love that one because of the hook shot mechanic.
Yeah, the hook shot was good, yeah. And then the Moth. I don't remember anything particularly special about that other than it was flying around. It was kind of hard to hit. I guess you had the fire rod at that point, maybe.
Yeah, the fire rod
made it easiest.
made it the easiest to take it down fast.
And then the one that I think I liked the best, just in terms of how it appears, was Blind the Thief.
So cool! Is that the name of that one?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think Zelda.
They talk about it.
They talk about it.
Yeah, they talk about the thief.
I was stumped for a while. I was in that. Anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll go dungeon by dungeon.
One by one. Yeah.
We're just trying to give kind of an overview, and then finally in the Ice Palace, which you haven't gotten to yet, there's an eyeball called Cold Stare, encased in ice.
Great names.
Yeah,
which you don't. I don't know them because I'm not looking at.
They don't say. They don't announce what they're called. I don't think, and this is just what people know them as.
Or they're probably, as we talked about, in the manual or something.
Exactly. Yeah, and we have some feedback that we'll talk about in the second half. People talking about the Hyrule Historia book. A couple people, based on your mentioning that, sent an email about that.
Yeah, I looked at it this last weekend. At a bookstore.
As we encountered these bosses, our reward afterwards is the story, basically. There's very little story in this game. It's very light on kind of direct storytelling. There's not a lot of, in the past, and occasionally you talk to people and they kind of fill you in a little bit. But mostly it's, the story is your tale, your own adventure through the environment. There is kind of a grander story of like, the 7 sages, the 7 wise men, whatever, sealed away this world, but the person who has the Triforce gets the golden power, and they can do, they can turn the world into a reflection of what's in their heart. And as you talk to each of these maidens, they explain, like, Ganon and what he's trying to do, and how Ganondorf, and how he's trying to open a gate between this world and Hyrule, and so you kind of have like multiple rewards that kind of come from beating a boss, which I want to just touch on, which was because you're always looking for where are the rewards when you play games, like what is the player reward, There's lots of sort of incremental rewards of just sort of player mastery and figuring out a dungeon, and we'll talk about the dungeons
intrinsic
specifically. Yeah. This is good point. Intrinsic, which means a reward in doing the activity itself. The activity itself is rewarding, and an extrinsic reward is often those little dribs and drabs of story. Achievements are an extrinsic award. They're great.
XP.
XP. Although that sort of goes back and forth because you get more powers, and that's kind of intrinsically rewarding. Often with XP, depending on the XP system.
But I mean, grinding is not really an intrinsic.
That's true.
You don't really. Yeah, I mean, in this game, the grinding you could say is linked to, no pun intended, mechanics that you get in the kind of Metroid way, which kind of does, to your point, blur the lines between intrinsic and extrinsic. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I grind for rupees is going to be my new T-shirt.
Yeah.
I had a bit of that going in.
There is grinding in the game for sure. It's just different.
Yeah. So you've got that's kind of the reward flow is like, I go, I'm able to I get new abilities. That's another reward. So you've got lots of these different rewards that are tied in, but the kind of extrinsic rewards are this little bit of story, which is just a couple paragraphs. It's not much. We didn't need much those days, I guess, right? To be happy. But often little bits of cutscene are the same way. Like often the cutscenes that you get when you accomplish something in a game and get the sort of little drib drab of story are part of the reward of playing the game. So
yeah. Well, I mean, in this era, though, the 16-bit Final Fantasy games were in this area, right?
Sure.
Though, and those were weren't those like just deep in story and kind of overtelling stuff compared to Zelda at the same time. It's an interesting, and I think it sounds like it's applicable to Breath of the Wild right now too, even though neither of us have played it yet, but. It is a very intentional choice that they have made. They could have added more story. They could have focused on it more because other games at the time, like the Final Fantasy games, had a lot more to read, if you will, or what have you. But it's really interesting there. And I hadn't played this one before, so I guess Ocarina maybe was my kind of first exposure to this weird dynamic of Ganondorf turning into Ganon and the dark, and then I looked at the Hyrule Historia over the weekend, like I said, and looked at the timeline that they have in there, and it's pretty ridiculous if you try to break it down. But then I guess Ocarina is farther in the past, and then there's all these alternate timelines based on which Link succeeded and which one failed and all this stuff.
Right.
So there's stuff there's enough to have a timeline, but within the games themselves, they're often legends or myths like we've talked about before, and
right.
It seems very intentional.
Yeah, no, I agree. We did talk about kind of how this is kind of deliberately light, in that way. But I did find myself wanting to get to tie that little bit of the story back together, and want to know what's going on. I mean, they don't go so far as to like it's a kind of in a nice sweet spot for me of like. Oh, okay, here's a little bit of why this is all going on, why you're doing all this stuff. Because it is kind of mad, where this game goes right at the beginning of this. We had kind of a tease of it last time where you get turned into the bunny rabbit and you moved around and then you turned back and you entered the Tower of Hera. Mm-hmm. Here... Yeah. We basically start from, okay, you're in that world now permanently. Which is, it's a big ask, it's interesting too in the way that just overlays all new content on the world.
There's a new filter over everything, and I was going to ask you if you felt this way. I didn't actually go and test it out in the details, but I feel like you take more damage in the Dark World. Like
Definitely,
when
twice
enemy
as much.
hits,
At least twice as much. Yeah,
pretty unforgiving, and so that kind of, you get this sense, like, it's a nice little touch for this sense of dread that they probably want you to feel about this other world, and how it is, and all the light fiction is all around how it's the darker place, and Ganon has, corrupted kind of everything, and things have kind of gone awry, and you go to the town, which I thought was cool, and there's like broken down, the same houses, locations for the houses are all like destroyed and broken down, and
there's signs everywhere saying how you have to have a lot of money to live here or something.
Yeah. And
people without money aren't allowed or something like that.
Yeah. I just realized the 7 and the seven deadly sins. I don't know. It's all numbers are all, the same numbers are always used for these sorts of things. But anyway, yeah, there's the very greedy, and then there's those little guys that chase you and take away your stuff. But I guess they're in both worlds. But yeah, it's a cool filter to see the world through, and the structure, the overall overworld map, the macro level design is similar to the regular world, but just different enough to kind of both frustrate you and delight you when you find a kind of
I was gonna say
the right way to go.
Puzzle, right, there's a puzzle element to that, like. I know I want to get over to here. There was one, I can't remember now.
Though for me, I actually had a hard time getting the hook shot to get across the river to get up to the forest one. I just wasn't reading the cues on standing in that one.
Yeah, I thought you'd be able to do it at the bridge and all that stuff. That took me a long time.
I was jumping in the water. And it just dawned on me. The hook shot's tricky, too, because oftentimes the thing you're hooking to is either right off camera or very slightly on camera, so it's not the visual tell there is not always as clear as it could be, but the gap in the wall was really the tell, I guess. But and those are the sorts of things you have to look for, right? I mean, we should have learned that from Super Metroid. That you have to look for the little ways it's different, the little breaks and the little. Yeah. But
it's sort of retraining my brain, to do that this time.
Yeah, and because you're in the other world, it's just the overworld is so dense with that stuff. Every screen has some visual storytelling or some telegraphing going on that you could apply meaning to. Right. And I just, for me, and this is a familiar feeling I have for every Zelda I've played. It's just an overwhelming feeling where it's just like, oh man, there's 10 things that could be happening on this one screen, and they probably all relate to, and I'm exaggerating, but they all relate to some mechanic that some of them I might have now, some of them I might get later, and so when do I come back to try to test out my theories? And then, of course, I can't track that stuff, so I have to remember, or I have to re-explore the world again when I think I have a critical mass of objects. So it's just overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like it wants you to make notes as you go of I saw this thing, not to try to remember it, but to actually just make a note and say, I saw this thing. And again, this is something that I hear about in Breath of the Wild, that they're really good at supporting, making notes that you can come back to.
Link Between Worlds has some stuff too, where you can do some pins,
colored pins. Yeah.
So they're edging into that, but I think talking some more about the dungeons now that we've gone through kind of the macro for each of them, I will say that I'm pretty impressed with the variety, and I don't remember Zelda 1 going this far, but you can now see with this particular game the legacy of how this has been carried forward with all the other Zeldas, and they probably really did start with this one because it's really diverse, more than I had anticipated. I especially liked and was surprised by getting to the forest dungeon and realizing that the forest was part of the dungeon in a way.
Right, yeah.
And you see all these multiple openings, you're like, that's weird, I can't get over that opening. Oh, wait a second, do I go inside and then I come back up? And very like kind of mind bending for me.
Yeah, that one was really wild, and actually, I think I saved the game and came back to it before I fought the boss, and so I had turned off the machine and come back, and so coming back, I then had to work my way through it mentally of like, how did I get, like, I know where I'm trying to get, but how did I get there? Like, what were my steps? And in the other dungeons, that was a lot less confusing. But here you're in this kind of dark and moody wood, and I don't know, it fits so well because it is so gloomy, and I mean, the art's really great there. Mm-hmm. One of the things that they do a really good job of in a couple places here, and I noted it too in the Palace of Darkness, which is the first one we played. To get to that, you go through a forest canopy, and you're underneath it. But there's little holes in it so that you can actually see where you are, progressing through it. Yeah. And it's kind of very similar technique with the sort of shadow, the shadows and the gloominess. I'm sure there's a palette swap in there, to be honest, because everything's impacted. You wouldn't be doing that in real time. I'm sure they're just like cycling some colors in a palette, but it's a really effective technique. It really, really differentiates that space. It was pretty wild how different all of these were.
And the multi-level, the thief's dungeon,
thieves town or whatever.
With the multi-leveled approach where you're going under the catwalks, and then underneath the catwalks actually are doorways that lead to the next screen.
Right.
But you kind of have to discover that. They don't really. Kind of.
Yeah, if you look on the map, you can see it.
That's true. I guess that's right. That's true. Yeah, that's probably.
But it took me a while to understand. Like, I need to look at the map and see how this is connected.
Yeah, it's just.
But by then, it was a skill I had learned. Yeah,
it's just a different spatial awareness that they ask of you in the dungeon. And there's, I guess, in some of the previous 3 dungeons for the pendants. I guess one of the maps, the very first dungeon had some of that multi-leveled stuff going on, or the castle maybe too. They teach you some of it, but it's just, the other thing you hear about Breath of the Wild right now is a kind of general notion of just respecting the player and letting the player explore and not hand-holding as much as they have in the past, and even as much as other open world games have at this time. And, the map being the main example of, like, we're not going to just put everything on the map so you can go and collect it. You actually have to go find it yourself. And I just appreciate that in this game, that, they're not... I guess I appreciate it after I figure it out. I don't appreciate it when I'm stuck. Right. And I got stuck multiple times in this section for sure. But the fact that they give you the benefit of the doubt of just like, we're not going to hold your hand. There's some nuance to this that is new in this particular dungeon that you're going to have to figure out. And so, I guess that was a little bit more of the era, and over time we've debated a lot on the show that over time we've started eroding at that and just handhold more and more and how we kind of miss the days of that. The Dark Souls and all the stuff we've talked about before, but
right, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's an interesting. I mean, I would probably prefer to be playing this game at my own pace because of that. Yeah. But then at the same point, it's possible I would have walked away.
Yeah, and that's what often happens to me. With
it's like, okay, I don't have time to figure this out, and I save it, and then I never come back. I mean, that's happened to me with a Zelda. I mean, Spirit Tracks I mentioned. I'm getting pretty close to the end of that game. I didn't play much this past week, but yeah, it's the same sort of thing where you get to a point where you're like a little bit stuck, and I passed the point where I had gotten stuck before, and I didn't get stuck at all. Like, I was like, why? How did I get stuck on this? Like, what did I miss? I couldn't figure out how I had been so dumb. This one is definitely a lot harder in that regard. And like you, I'm trying not to, consult walkthroughs and things like that. Though I did finally with the ice boss on this one, because I was like, because I got to a point where I literally was unable to damage it and I didn't know what to do. and I was, it was Sunday, and we were like, well, we could be recording today, so I better get on this.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the pace we're playing is just
it's hard. It's a lot.
It's a bit ridiculous. Yeah. And I feel, because I really, one of the other notes I wrote down kind of as a segue to that point is of our pacing is the thing about Zelda games, and I think we're not going to get to talk about Breath of the Wild after playing it, but I maybe we'll come back to it someday. But the thing that I've always really enjoyed, I like the dungeons, and I think they're always fun to kind of figure out the shtick of each of them, and the puzzles, really well designed ones, are really always interesting. But I think in Zelda games, the overworld is really where I enjoy the game the most, in general. But in this game, and the first one to some degree too, from my vague memory, I feel like it's very over-indexed on the dungeons being the main focus of most of the game, and that's really the thrust and the essentially the progression that they're pushing you through. And I'm bummed about that, because and part of it is the pacing that we're trying to play at, because I feel like I have to kind of just go to the next dungeon. I can't really stop. I've tried to do a little bit of collecting stuff. Like sounds like you've gotten some more jars and hearts than I have. I still only have one jar, so it's pretty fresh. It's pretty challenging with just one. But I want to spend more time in the Overland. But they don't make it easy on you to kind of make that the focus of the way you play, especially because we're playing in a fast fashion. But then you hear the stories of Breath of the Wild where it seems like it's almost the inverse, in that I guess there's only half a dozen dungeons in the whole game, like core dungeons, and there's shrines and stuff, but the overworld is really where the game seems to shine. And I don't know, it's interesting progression for them to kind of migrate in that direction.
Well, and I mean, I think that fits very well with the sort of ancillary mechanics that they have, where you are building up, you're going to make better gear, basically, and better food that will help you, to have more hearts, or better improve your stamina. Like they've added these mechanics that support the overworld, being useful to you in a way that this doesn't. I mean, when I'm running around the overworld, I'm generally avoiding combat because all the enemies are in the same place and things like that. And I'm just trying to get to an area that I may have not been to in a while. Just to see if I've missed anything there. And I mean, that's been really rewarding, because there is a ton of little side stuff. I don't know if you found the second blacksmith.
No, not yet.
And then I finally figured out what that dude hanging out by the sign that was one of the jars.
In the desert?
In the desert, yeah. I finally figured out what
to do with him. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll go down there.
Sort of.
Or he starts a quest for it.
He's involved in the acquisition of a jar. Let's put it that way. And then
he's involved in the acquisition of a jar. That's a funny sentence.
Thank you. And then there's other.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I have to go back to the one that I haven't done, is the woodsmen who were cutting down a tree. There's got to be something there, but I haven't gone back there in a while. So that's the thing I'll probably do this time. I mean, a lot of that is just like the overworld itself is not interesting, but there are these locations in it and people in it where I'm constantly thinking, well, I haven't been back to the town, to Kakariko or whatever in a while. Or I haven't been there in the Dark World much or whatever. I did a ton of stuff around there, just like peeking into different houses and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I just feel like it doesn't. I don't know how else to say it other than it doesn't make it easy on you to enjoy that part of the game.
Right. Part of it is you're going through multiple screens and you're skipping around trying to avoid. Yeah, you're trying to avoid
things, and the routes are circuitous and convoluted sometimes. And I guess, and then as a related point to that, another note that I'm noticing that I wrote down kind of related to this is and then we talked about this some with Metroid. The concept, actually, no, it's similar to Metroid, but there's a fundamental difference with Zelda that I think is interesting now that I'm thinking about it, is that with each dungeon you get a new ability, essentially, and with each ability you essentially multiply your options and the things that you could be interacting with the world because of this new mechanic. And at the point of the game where we have, most of them, and I go back to the overworld, or really sometimes in dungeons, but usually the telegraphing is much clearer there about which one of those items you're supposed to use.
Right.
But you're in the overworld, and the number of options and things that, like we said earlier, you have to both remember where they are, but also think about which of the 10 things I now have that could interact with it. Sometimes it's obviously pretty obvious, like a sconce that you can light on fire or something. But I've tried, like I have that dust, that magic powder that I got from the witch's house.
Yes, from the mushroom, yeah.
And I'm putting that stuff on everything I find, but it's like, I don't, there's no...
I know something you don't know.
Oh, geez. See, so I just haven't figured something out. But I guess my point is, that is another option that is multiplying...
Try it on dungeon enemies. There's a specific dungeon enemy that has a specific effect on.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's a good clue. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like... there's a vague enough direction when you get that pouch of dust as one example,
right,
of like, try this.
Yes.
And it's such an open-ended description. It was man, really?
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that your opportunities to try it at that point are not actually going to lead you to the thing.
No. It's like far... Yeah, the distance between the... Yeah. And this is actually...
I had actually forgotten it, and I equipped it by accident. I meant to equip the lantern, which lets you cut. And
by accident.
And I equipped, so I equipped that because I just forgot which was which to do what they did. And that's how I actually discovered. So I totally discovered.
I wonder what. Yeah. Well, then the other example that's very similar is the earthquake thing. Do you have that thing yet?
I do, and I haven't found. That seems just like a damage everything kind of.
Well, yeah,
thing.
But.
It feels like it should do more. I agree.
In my head, and in my...
I'm like, should I go up to the top of where Mount Hera is, or Tower of Hera is? That's like a volcano area. Like, maybe I should do it up there.
Well, and there's some floors and some walls that I haven't been able to break through yet, and I assume it's...
Oh, my God, that's totally it. That's got to be it.
What are you talking about?
There's a big wall in the pyramid.
I tried it.
And it didn't work.
No, it didn't work. But that's my point. It's like, It's all this trial and error stuff, which you're not... And because these are analog uses, other than, say, like the lighting things on fire with the lantern, but then now we have an ice rod and a fire rod, and those are elementals. So who knows what the heck those can be used on, like fire, but lighting things on fire. And that is kind of the fun. It sounds like the fundamental tenet of Breath of the Wild in general, right? Is it's all materiality, and like everything is based on physics, and what you think should happen will happen. So yes, I can light wood on fire, etc., but that's not the case here.
Right.
And so it's this weird trial and error lock and key stuff where it's like, well, this could work.
Let me go find the one tree you can light on fire,
Yeah, exactly. And then there's also a resource attached to it, so I can't even light on fire infinitely. I have to find more energy, or mana or whatever the heck. So I don't know. It's just... It's one of those things that makes...
Yeah, and that's a weird bone I had to pick with it, is that you get more hearts.
Oh, yeah, good point.
But you never get more of the mana. You just have whatever that little... And it's weird. It's weird, too, in how that's parceled out, because, of course, hearts, you can take fractions of hearts of damage. It's like, they're two...
The balancing...
It's actually a failing, right, in that those are two just totally different... systems I need to read to understand, like, how much magic I actually have. Like, I don't really know. Like, I'm usually pretty, if I'm actually having to depend on the magic, I'm usually pretty frenetically running around trying to avoid getting hit by something. And I can't, because I don't use the magic much. I mostly rely on the sword, especially now that I've got it powered up. So, yeah, it's just...
The balancing of the magic system, I don't think, is great. Because
the things that take, right? It's not in other games.
Yeah, and the things that you that you can, the things that use magic, they've balanced in such a way to make them more, because they're more powerful, so they take more damage or more magic points or what have you of the bar. But like the earthquake thing takes up maybe a third of the bar every time you use it, or close to a half. So it's really like out of whack. And like going and finding replenishment for that, I guess, unless you use a jar potion, is not easy, or
right.
It's not a quick endeavor. So
no,
if I'm going around like testing that thing on things, like the commitment to that exploration, quote unquote, is pretty big. And so it discourages you from using that stuff. Now, incidentally, one quick note about that bar, in Link Between Worlds, that bar recharges.
Oh.
So which is much better, of course. And
right.
so and lots of things. So
and a stop to the modern Halo gamer.
Right. Yes. They little interesting influence there. But Link Between Worlds is, I haven't played very much of it since then. But as far as like the modernization of this game of Link to the Past, it's definitely a lot of. They have a fast travel system in there, which that was another big surprise in this game for me. Finding the ocarina, flute, and the bird thing, and then it goes to the map, and you can actually select which part of the map you want the bird to fly you to, which blew my mind for this era.
Yeah, me too. I was really surprised. I had a hard time remembering that because I use a couple of the water spouts or whatever, which is, as we were talking about pre-show, which is more of an Ultima thing, like that you go through like the moon gate and it takes you to some other moon gate, and that's a known thing. Like it's actually in the manual, or you need to find clues in some cases, like when you can go from moon gate to move around the world more quickly. But so that's just a natural thing for me, and I forget about the bird. And apparently, you can use it anywhere. And I don't know that I've really done that much.
I kept forgetting, that I could use it too. I found it later. I didn't.
That's part of the thing. Like, there's so much stuff in this game.
Yeah.
You want to touch on? Do you want to touch on combat or difficulty? I think we have one more topic here.
Well, let's hit combat really quickly. I think it's a quick one, and then I think we definitely need to talk about difficulty because we both, especially you, have stuff to say about that. But the combat thing I mentioned a little bit last time, but the combat thing I wanted to mainly mention. And I had another example that I'm forgetting now, but hopefully it'll come to me. But the interesting point. Oh yes, I remembered. That I wanted to make. I think that's interesting takeaway for me so far is that the way that the AI enemies are interacting with you in a combat sense, and the way compared to how your mechanics and controls work within combat, I don't think are well married together. So what I mean by that is, as an example, I'll get into like a detailed example here, which is maybe a little bit too anal, but the enemies will often move in a diagonal line, and you,
it's already a problem. Yeah,
as a control in the way that the game controls, especially I'm playing on the 3DS, so I technically can use the pad, the gamepad thing, but not the D-pad, but the little stick thing, the slider stick.
Right.
So I have a little bit more control over diagonal, but it's still finicky. And not only that, but
diagonal's terrible on the classic controller on the Wii.
It's terrible with the D-pad, but also
I can't pull it off.
His sword swings, like there isn't technically a diagonal sword swing. Yes, he swoops, and so you can hit things in one of the diagonal directions if you're lucky, but it's not. It's finicky, right? And so I feel like I'm often in combat, especially in this section, which we'll talk about in difficulty in a moment, but I'm often in combat where I'm surrounded by multiple things, and I really don't feel equipped to actually interact with them because they kind of are moving and acting in a more complex way than I have controls to actually react to them. You know what I mean?
Right.
And because really the sword swings are most effective in the 4 cardinal directions, and you moving in diagonals is possible, but it doesn't really work in combat that well, and it's just not. And so the example I wanted to bring up is actually one of the revelations that at the time I didn't really fully appreciate. And I think when they went to 3D with Ocarina, and I think about the Z lock-on and the Z targeting, that actually is a good marriage of the two. Yeah. Where you have a good camera focus, it's like, I feel like it is another one of those brilliant Nintendo things where they leveled up their own system and improved upon it in a whole new, medium, essentially, with 3D, and it got better. I think the 3D combat in Zelda is better than the 2D combat in Zelda.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Now, I mentioned it last time, or maybe the time before, or whatever, how it felt kind of arcadey to me. And this was part of what I was talking about, was that the sword-on-sword combat feels like Joust.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's like lining up. Yeah, it's like lining up and trying to, and like a guy's throwing a harpoon at me, and I might be able to knock it out of the air before it hits me, or I might not. Like, there's a lot of just like very fine-grained. I mean, I'm sure a very skilled player can do these things pretty regularly, but. I'm just always trying to keep my health up. I mean, the number of times that I've gone to see a specific fairy well or whatever they're called, the fairy fountains, to like, I have this circuit I do, which is actually a good segue into the difficulty, because I spent so much time making circuits from top of pyramid in the Dark World to near the Dark Palace. There's a fairy fountain, and then I'd go over to the store, which is north of there, and I'd fill up my vials, my glass bottles with fluids.
Oh my god, dude!
And then I'd go back, and then it almost always would take damage on the way. I'd be like, well, I'll just go to the fairy fountain again on the way, and it's just like, this was my loop. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna do this 10-minute thing every time I, start again. Or every time I'm about to do a thing, whatever that is. It's like, if I had to turn it off for an hour, I'd come back and be like, oh, I'm back. Or I died outside the dungeon, which would be painful because then you're back at the pyramid. I'd be like, well, I guess I'm just going to do this now. And it just was like, it just became part of my play. Like, oh, I'm going to go do this. It's like, oh, I failed on, let's see, the ones I had trouble with, I beat, like, the Helmasaur took me a couple tries, which is the first boss from this time, and the Thief took me a couple tries, and the Ice boss took me at least 3 tries. So that was,
Oh my god, see, yeah. I mean,
so I'd end up going and, like, filling in all this stuff to go and make another run. It was like it's like an old school, like, D&D tough dungeon where you're like, I'm gonna get all this stuff that I might need, and then I go in and I get my ass kicked, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna refill all of that stuff and get the other thing that I've now learned that I need, and I'm gonna go try and go back.
So not to enact the drinking game, but does it sounds like Dark Souls?
Yeah, well,
I mean, they kind of like the cycling through and like kind of like perfecting the run and like
I guess to a certain degree,
going back to get your body and
It's funny though because the difficulty would be more so, like, you talked about the variety of the mechanics in navigating spaces and things like that. Like, once you get to the ice, it's like there's areas where it's like, well, I know I have to go into this room. Where the floor is going to be moving, and there's spikes everywhere, and the floor moves randomly, and so I'm going to take some damage there. I'm always going to take some damage there, and then I'm going to go from there. I'm going to go into a room, and there's going to be pots everywhere, and I'm going to have to like, okay, I'm going to have to go north because I know the second pot in there I can get a health back, and then I can cross over to the other side and pick up the same one on the other side and get one there. Meanwhile, there's one of those bouncing around things going in, and those ghosts flying back and forth, and I'm just like, my God! And if at any point that all goes wrong, of course I know about the magic powder, so I have some extra resources. And I find the fairy fountains. I think there might be one in just about every dungeon.
I think there is.
Yeah. So you figured that out.
I think so. I think I've found them in most of them, but
okay, yeah. Usually you have to fall into like a pot or something like that. So you have to look for these holes, and the teleport spots are like the clue that there's one here, and you just got to figure out how to get to it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I I mean, I trust me, I feel bad about this save system that the DS has, but when I hear you describe this, like, I don't know if I'd make it if I didn't have that. You know,
I probably spent once I actually got to the bottom of the dungeon,
yeah,
and could face the ice boss, and learned how screwed I was, because I was just like, I didn't know that I needed. So you need a certain amount of magic to be able to beat it, because you need to use the fire rod.
There's no other way,
and there's no other way as far as I can tell, because it's encased in ice, and so you have to melt the ice. I spent a lot of time just roaming the world to get the bottles. I was looking for anywhere, and those were, some of them were like things that they turned out to be connected to things that I was curious about. Like I said, there's that guy in the desert, and he had one.
I mean, I want to do that stuff.
Yeah. But mostly it was just like, are you kidding me? The amount of time I spent on that would probably have been where I stopped playing this game. Like, the rest of them were not too bad. Like, I didn't get to it and go, oh, you cheated me. I didn't know I needed to have this. That said, there is a sign in the ice dungeon that says you need to have you need to use the fire rod. Like, make sure you have lots of magic. The sage is communicating through those triangles on the wall. Mm-hmm. And he actually literally says, like, you're going to need a lot of magic. And I guess I really didn't pay quite enough attention to that. But it is a big step up of, like, how different.
Right.
To be.
You can drain, I mean, with that rod, you can drain your magic fast.
Yeah, it's fast,
like,
and if
every
you miss,
shot has to. Yeah.
If you miss, it's like, oh, great. Now what do I do?
And I mean, I don't know. I hate to chalk it up to just sort of the era, but does it feel, because you're playing the real, quote unquote, real way, does it feel fair? Like the difficulty tuning?
That one felt unfair. That one, that's the one that felt unfair. The other ones I didn't feel bad about. It was really just player skill, usually, of just like, I didn't quite, I'm not quite, good enough to get in the sword swings without.
It's not easy. It's just not.
The Helmasaur, was one where I kept getting hit by that tail. That was what, while I would try to rush in. I tried to rush in and hit him with a helmet. And I did it once, and then I switched to bombs because I just was having no luck getting close enough to him to hit him a second time. Like, first time was easy. Her first hit was free. Then the beholder creature was easy. Like, no trouble at all.
And he was. I liked as a quick call out to that. You're talking about the one with the hook shot.
Yeah,
where you take the fireball. It's such a cool. I didn't know what was going on, and when I discovered that, that sense of delight of oh, this is awesome, and then you just kind of whittle them down. It's just really some really cool boss moments in that regard. And then we talked. Did we talk about this on air or off air about the guy in the forest dungeon at the end with the blind thief?
That was not the forest dungeon. That was Town. I forget where that is.
Is that the one? That's the one in the town.
The woods, right?
Yeah, maybe
the woods was the moth.
That's right. Yeah. Anyway, the one where you have to go up above and kind of break the floor so the light's shining through.
Yeah,
and then you find this character in the dungeon, and he or she wants you to bring him out, and
and I went all the way back out to the entrance.
I went to two different entrances. There's two directions you can go where he says, no, not this way. And I'm like, seriously? Which
really?
Which way?
I was ticked.
When you bring him into that room I
actually walked out, and the person reset back to the thing, and I had to go all the way back. I was like, come on.
Luckily, I had to
You want me to get you out? Yeah, you son of
a... but then you bring him into that room, and he steps into the light, and just... Really clever. Oh, and the other quick tidbit on the dungeon that's in the swamp area, the water level.
Very good.
Filling. I couldn't believe that was something that the 16-bit game was doing. Really clever and well done.
Yeah, and made you need those Zora flippers or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, just as far as the the progression
that was,
and the ramp
I'm glad you called that out. That was a great moment.
And just thinking back to the 16-bit era and this coming out, like, and I'm kind of bummed I didn't get to experience it at the time because I just missed this one. But I can see why people flip out about this game. Probably similarly the way that they're flipping out about Breath of the Wild now. But it's just some darn good, just pure. Other than the balancing and the difficulty, and I think the telegraphing. Challenges because there isn't a lot. I mean, okay, take notes, but I feel like even as a kid, I never took notes.
Yeah.
But still, there's so many good things with, especially in that dungeon design with some of this stuff. That just every time we go into a dungeon, and then I haven't finished it, but getting into the ice dungeon, then having the floor physics with the ice in this era, even physics on the water and the swimming.
Yeah, it all feels really good.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break to refill our own waters and fill up our bottles, I suppose. And then we'll come back and get to some of our feedback and talk about it next time.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We've been talking about Link to the Past, and we've got some email. I'm going to throw it over to you, Tim. We had a couple of emails about the Hyrule, the Historia Hyrule, or whatever it is. You come on, fill me in.
Hyrule Historia, yeah, I think that's what it's called. I forget the order, but I think it's Hyrule Historia. Yeah. Okay, so the first email is from Jonathan DeLuca. He says, "Hey guys. Great show again. The lore book Tim was referring to is the Hyrule Historia that was released with Skyward Sword in 2011. The new book is called Arts and Artifacts. Okay, they were both at the bookstore when I found them. I didn't realize one was just released. And it is a phone book-sized collection of all the art from the Legend of Zelda series. Full disclosure, I'm disturbingly in love with Zelda. With that being said, I think it's awesome what they do with the lore. When you hear they have a book dedicated to it, you might think, oh God, don't want to think about all of this. It's actually very subtle, and the only thing it really sets in stone is the chronological order of the games. Anyway, I love exploring the different iterations of Hyrule, looking for historical Easter eggs from past games. Breath of the Wild nailed it in this regard. My own little anecdote there in Link to the Past, or Link Between Worlds, Majora's Mask is on the wall in Link's room.
Oh, cool.
So back to his email. I forgot to send you guys my little Just for Fun gaming podcast. We didn't get to the Shadow of the Colossus soundtrack yet. We've been kind of going hard at Zelda. If you listen, you might want to avoid the spoiler cast episode about Breath of the Wild. I did with some podcast friends. Anyway, there is some cool Zelda music episodes I did leading up to the launch of Breath of the Wild you might like. The show's called Play and Listen. Cool. Well, check it out. A gaming podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Maybe you guys might dig it. Either way, thanks for your show. You guys really hit it out of the park again. I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks. P.S. Tim, you're not fascinated watching an elite relief pitcher like Andrew Miller throw his unhittable backdoor slider that causes batters to jump rope. No.
Yeah, he was playing a little bit on your lack of baseball vocabulary from last week.
Most of the terms that you just mentioned in that PS, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'll put a show note in with a link probably to the SoundCloud and iTunes. Yeah, play and listen, so give that a listen. You had a follow-up email. I trimmed the top half of this because it covered a lot of the same Historia Hyrule stuff. But it does talk a little bit about the timeline from Nick Tapolansky, I believe.
Yeah, I didn't. I was considering buying the book, but I didn't. So I just took a screenshot of the timeline and sent it to Brett, and basically stole one page virtually. So yeah, he talks about a little bit of that timeline, I think. So here we go. From Nick, edited down a little bit. The biggest complaint I've come across is that all the original NES, SNES titles, as well as their direct Game Boy sequels, technically exist as a result of an outcome the player can't actually experience in Ocarina of Time, which I have to agree is a bit odd, and adds plenty of fuel to the why bother creating a timeline if it doesn't work argument. This particular branch of timeline only exists if, in the final battle of Ocarina, the player loses to Ganon and just turns off the system rather than retrying. Like I said, it's a bit odd. I'm a lore nut like Tim. Good for you. And loved hypothesizing about all this stuff when there wasn't an official map connecting everything together. Now that we have it, I find myself wishing it was still exciting guessing among friends, loosely cobbled together and hotly contested over a pizza. Totally agree with you, Nick. Of note, this book's release predated A Link Between Worlds, which falls between Link's Awakening and The Legend of Zelda in the Link of Time, The Link of Time in the timeline, and Breath of the Wild, which I haven't finished yet and have been obsessively avoiding spoilers on, so I'm not sure where they've plotted that yet. Anyway, hope this Zelda Timeline 101 course has helped to further confuse things, as time paradoxes and divergent futures are wont to do. Enjoy the game, gents, but if we don't get a bonus episode or live stream of you guys fumbling through the original NES Zelda, one of my top all-time 5 games, playing Breath of the Wild now, hands down one of the biggest influences, I'm demanding a refund. Best, Nick. Yeah, I've had a thought. I mean, I think both of us think about whether we'll ever stream playing something, and I think we should consider that.
I did it a couple times earlier in the cast. When we play PC titles, I sometimes will just jump on Twitch and play a little bit. In particular, in System Shock, I was playing.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was playing as you, because, and I just had because of,
we swapped.
Yeah, because of time. I've been very busy this year, and I mean, really the last 9 months or so. And I just have not had the time to do that. It would be fun. I do have the original Legend of Zelda kicking around upstairs, so I might.
It'd be fun to. I think to Nick's point here, the interesting thing that I think would be fun to do is to have us both playing.
Yeah, like side by side, right, or something where we're kind of discovering something at the same time, and maybe like live commentary. Because I mean, I know you and I both are doing it, but I take a lot of notes while I'm even little weird minutia that we never talk about on air. So that stuff would just come up on the fly. I don't know. Right,
I mean, there's also playing a co-op game or a multiplayer game, which would also be another tactic to do that, right? Where we could be playing literally in the same game.
Yeah, that would be pretty
extreme. Cool. And we wouldn't have to do it. I don't know. Maybe we do bonus episode streams occasionally. But yeah, anyway. Yeah. Cool, Nick. Yeah, that timeline is something else. And when I finally did see it this last weekend, I was like, really? Because it's a legend. It should remain mysterious. But
yeah, I agree. All right, I have one from Michael Keene, who I think has written in before. He says, "Hello, Longo Duville Jr. You folks have said repeatedly that the restrictions of game development have led to some of the coolest / best innovations. Now that games are much less restricted in their size, I routinely have games that take 40 or 50 gigabytes of space on my PS4, how does this affect development? In what ways does it prevent creativity, and in what ways does it inspire creativity? If limiting factors have led to ingenuity in the past, given that there are fewer restrictions now, has that had a negative impact? Or perhaps I'm wrong and there are no downsides to having more space. Or perhaps I'm wrong again to assume that there are no longer limits." Anyway, he says, it just seems like you fellas wax poetic about how the lack of space / time, not in the actual universe, but more in the game dev universe, used to lead to so many cool innovations. I'm not sure now that with teams of 300 folks per game, those same innovations are happening. Thanks for any insight that you can provide, says Keane.
Yeah.
That's a big topic. Yeah.
Do we have another hour plus?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
No,
not
we don't.
it's not a small topic, but we should dig into it a little bit. I would say, I mean, one of the things that the amount of space and processing power we have has really inspired and led to more creativity is in all of the art that are in the games. I mean, these are, the artists and the animators who make, the whatever, all the 3D stuff you see in the games. They have a lot of space to work with now, and they can be really, really very creative, I think, in how they present what used to be, 16 by 16 sprites on the screen, as we're seeing here, right? I mean, and they don't even have to be big, sort of individual moments. Like, each boss, right, obviously here stands apart quite a bit in these older 16-bit games, for example. But that's a really great thing to let people just kind of be turned loose, on making something really come to life, and and do that. And I said animation too, because obviously the fidelity of animation these days is just phenomenal compared to what we came up with. Yeah,
the spin that I would because I echo what Brett's saying, but the spin I'll add to it is, I was having this conversation recently with somebody, but I specifically in art and animation direction side of things, really what we've gotten to a point with these current systems and specs on the PC is that art direction is now much more of a choice than it ever has been before. Where in the old days, low poly and low texture fidelity were sort of dictating certain things to you, and so you kind of had to be clever for different reasons. But now, if you want a stylized game, it can still be high fidelity and high resolution and high poly, but it's a choice that you can make. You can go more photorealistic if you want, but you have the ability to to really be declarative with what you want to do with things. And I think to his point, about as far as lack of innovation in the visual side of what we can do these days, I think the bummer is that the photorealism is kind of not. It's not that it's easy to do, but it's an easy answer.
It's the default path.
Yeah, and I think I've been really excited and happy to see, especially right now when you have Horizon and Zelda come out at the same time and have having been well received, but different goals in this area. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Zelda's clearly making, not that the processing power is anywhere near the same, but they're making conscious decisions, which they always have, really. But that's one cool thing about it. I think on the limitation side to jump. Oh, and then on the I guess on the design and tech side, I don't know your thoughts on this.
I was gonna go there next, and then maybe finish off with business. But the only
thing I'll say there that you should maybe chime into more is, I feel like these days one of the innovations that again is a choice. You still have to really focus because you can't do everything, even though people try. Lord knows. Is I guess I'll just say in a blanket statement, the simulation side of it. I feel like we have more levers now than ever before if we want to focus on physics simulation or we want to focus on AI simulation or something like that, not to emulate real life, but I just feel like there's more options there than ever before. You still have to be thoughtful about what your direction is, but
yeah, I mean, one of the things, and this does tie in with the business stuff as well, and one of the things that I think we lament is that with the amount of money it now costs to build games, it's very possible that, and the business as well being super hit driven, is that there's not a lot of risk, from the point of view of the people who hold the purse strings, that they're willing to take.
Yeah, it's all risk-based. I was going to say exactly the same thing.
Yeah. So, and that's a very similar thing to sort of the blockbuster model in Hollywood, right? I mean, if you're not going to spend $100 million, don't even show up, right? I mean, there's kind of like this, and then of course that limits what they can do. I mean, they're limited by, they have to appeal to global markets. So that's why every superhero movie not only destroys something in America, but also something in Italy, France, definitely China. China's a huge market. So you've got like these implications. I mean, that's why in these big bombastic movies, that is what you see year in, year out. It's because they can't afford to let that money go. They can't let that market go. They have to have something in the film that appeals to them. And the same thing is happening in games when you've got that much money involved. I will say, though, that one of the nice things has been that just like in Hollywood, where there was a rise of an indie film aesthetic that has impacted film, there's a similar rise, in an indie game making, that parallels the industry and that kind of feeds on the margins of the AAA. It's like a pilot fish falling around a whale or something like that, right? I mean, it's taking little bits, from the gigantic whale that is the AAA industry. But we also take stuff from them, so crafting stuff started coming into games more because of Minecraft, to take one example, or I had a really good one. In Uncharted 2, there's that level in the middle where you're in the Tibetan village. I think it's Tibetan. Apologies to the people of Tibet if not. But that moment of calm was taken from walking simulators like Proteus or Dear Esther. So that Richard LaMarchant has talked about that. So we're because we all play games, and because we've also played all these kind of big games all our lives, and we're often very interested in the stuff that's not the kind of main meat of the industry, of the AAA industry, as much as we still love those. We're playing those and seeing stuff and going, that would be perfect. That's a small little thing that I could add that might be stand apart on its own, or might be able to be integrated as a new mechanic, that we just kind of take in and make our own. So
Yeah, I mean, the iteration and production because it has gotten so expensive, and change, right? Making a change to something. And if you just take a level, something, just geometry as one example, right? Like the production realities of that these days for a AAA game is such a big deal. And then if something needs to be changed in that level when it's mid-production because it's just not working, then that's an expensive change, right? And so those are hard decisions that become limitations for teams to make because of the implications of that, right? And so to Brett's point, the risk aversion that's there of like, well, we can't take a risk in trying to change this thing because it's too late, or we can't take a risk in something that isn't a sure bet because we need this level to be in production by this month if we're ever going to get it done, because it takes 10 times as long to make a level now than it did 10 years ago. So, and you need, so many more people to do it. So,
yeah. And certainly, I mean, I think games mechanics wise, and I'll just throw this in there from Bethesda, they tend to, and Todd's talked about this publicly, so I don't think they'll sue me. But we would tend to throw a lot of different stuff at the wall and see what the team enjoyed, and use that to guide later development. So we tried to delay making those decisions as long as possible. We knew there was certain stuff we knew we needed to have that we couldn't go back on, a certain number of what we call POIs, or points of interest, and dungeons, and the big map and the cities and whatever, like in certain of the quest stuff. But some sort of big pillars of stuff that we had to have. But we didn't know dragons were going to turn out as well as they turned out for Skyrim. And so we kind of, once they started really turning out well, and that was from a small sub-team that really just kind of dove in and didn't show us anything and made it work, and then brought it back to integrate with everybody else. There is still room for that, but it takes a different style of development. And I mean, I think Bethesda is lucky in that it's still relatively small. I mean, it's a little over 100 people on the development team. They just work, together for years, and they know how it all works together.
Yeah.
So it's still possible. It's just really, really difficult. And of course, Bethesda games are not quite as polished as other AAA games. That's a trade-off that they make. So you have to be willing to make those trade-offs. I think a lot of the reason why you see Ubisoft games kind of having a similar structure mechanically, in terms of like the multiple things to do with kind of layers of markers on the map, is because it's something they now know how to do really well and can do, and they know it delivers a certain kind of experience that they can fit a particular story into or whatever. They've answered a lot of questions that helps them absorb the risk. Like, okay, we know how to do this. To do something totally different for them is difficult. So, you see the same thing with anybody who's been doing the same sorts of games for a while. So,
yep.
So that is a long answer, but probably only about a tenth of what we would probably have to say about that had we the time.
Yeah, I'm holding back many things. But
I bet it. I think it touches on a bunch of stuff.
We gave an overview, though. I think of
yeah. I was going to throw it over to you for a review. I wanted to actually, before we do that, we've been getting a lot of reviews. We really appreciate them. We're running a little long tonight, so we're not going to read them all this week, but we'll keep sprinkling them in. I have them all laid out, and we'll just kind of do a few each week. But yeah, we're doing a drive to try to get to 75, which is roughly 5% of our base that listens to the cast every week, of ratings and reviews on iTunes. So when we get to 75, I'm going to pull from all the people whose names are in there on reviews, and I'm going to give a gift that I will get your address and figure that stuff out. And so with that, I have Tim with another review.
Okay. Great Industry Perspective by Irreverent Q. I'm an indie game developer in New York with a master's in game design. Good for you. Awesome. But I still find this podcast an incredibly valuable listen. I love hearing developers in the AAA game industry examine how modern conventions were established by playing early to mid-90s foundational games, probably because that's what I'm thinking about most of the time anyway. This podcast provides a feast of food for thought, and helps make me a better designer for my own games. Thanks for the mental stimulation.
You're very welcome, Reverend Q. I assume of the Q Continuum. That's what we try to do here, is dig deep. It's actually really helpful for me, not as a person who's mostly a designer, but who has played games for a long time, to put my thoughts into order. It helps me in my day-to-day work. So I'm glad it helps others. All right, I have another email and then one quick review, and then I guess we'll get to the several of the other reviews next time. But yes, thank you for all of them.
Thank you.
Embarrassment
so
of
much.
riches. And you can do that on iTunes. But I have here from Phil Rosehill, who is our speedrunning, I don't know, what is that? Editor at large or something like that. He sends us in stuff. He says he saw Beyond Good and Evil in the show notes a few episodes back and expected Ansel, not Nietzsche. Anyway, I'm greatly enjoying the commentary on Link to the Past, especially since neither of you had played it before. Unsurprisingly, Link to the Past has a speedrunning community that rivals that of Super Metroid. After you've saved Hyrule, you may enjoy some of these videos.
Yeah.
The reverse boss order race is particularly thrilling, with the runners completely breaking the game. Similar techniques can also be used to finish the game in about 4 minutes.
What?
I know, right?
That's
so
amazing.
I will send these links out. He sent a 100% run, 4-way, any percent race, no major glitches, featuring the second fastest time ever recorded, and a reverse boss order, any percentage race. He sounds like they have to break the game. So that's part of the speedrunning community, is like different ways in which you can glitch games. And
yeah, sure.
I've seen some pretty crazy, Mario exploits and things like that, for Mario 64 and rocket launch yourself to the moon and all that stuff with flying the warthog around there. But all right, and then I had one last quick review, which is just a gem defined by Pickled Stick, because just the motivation I needed to play some classic games I never got around to. Super Metroid was so much fun. So I wanted to throw that in there, especially coming on the heels of Phil Rosehill, who is our Super Metroid speedrunning man. We got a lot of great links from him while we were doing that game. And yeah, it's been just the motivation for me too. So
yeah,
especially some of these early Nintendo titles, because as I've mentioned before, my first console was a PS2. There's a lot of games that I've always been like, man, I would really like to go back to find the time to play some of these games and see where the seeds were.
Yeah. I guess it's sort of dumb of me not to say this before, but I now that I think about it, the way that we have the format, like, I highly recommend. I mean, I guess it's probably pretty fun to try to play along with us at the pace that we play, because you get it real time, and you're kind of playing literally along with us. But there's no reason why you can't just spend as much, wait a few, let us get ahead of you, and then spend as much time as you need to get to the next spot, and then listen to the episode then, because I think the pace that we try to play at can impact your enjoyment.
At times. I mean, certainly I think the Final Fantasy IX was one. We played that ridiculously fast, and we spent more episodes on it than we normally do. But even so, I mean, that was just ridiculous. We played that game so fast.
Yeah, we may need to
for us, certainly
think of our calculations for how we figure out how many episodes. Maybe calculate.
Yeah, we could have made this one. We could have made this series longer, I think.
We probably could have. Yeah.
But it's hard to know, because we end up going and looking online and being like, well, how long do people say this game is? And then we look at it and it's like, 15 hours, that's not so bad. And then I just spent 20 hours playing Link to the Past this weekend just to do these 5 dungeons.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was quite 20 hours, but it was a lot. Yeah. So, I mean, I think unfortunately a lot of those are informed by, well, here on my 30th playthrough, I'm down to a slim, 10 and a half hours for Link to the Past, and I'm like, I don't know if that's ever gonna be me. But anyway, that is about it for this time for reviews and feedback. We will catch up with more of the reviews next time. We're just running a little late tonight. So for next time, I guess we're finishing off this game.
Yep.
Which is amazing. There's only 3 dungeons left, so I don't think it'll be quite...
4 for me.
Yeah, really 4 for you. But I don't think it would be quite so bad as it was this time in terms of difficulty to get it all done. So it's, it shouldn't be too bad, though. I think, I'm going to actually, if I have enough time to carve out, I'm going to try to find more of the world stuff. Like, there's a place I know about that I'm like, I got to figure out how to get in there. Like, it's blocked off in the dark world. I'm like, how am I going to get in there? How do I get to the light world?
We didn't talk about it, but I do really like the few moments where you do have to kind of go between worlds to get to, like getting into the ice dungeon as an example.
Right, you have to do it,
there's a few hearts that are like that.
That was tricky,
Which it's neat. It's the mechanic of how they limit that is really interesting, so you can't really exploit it and do crazy things with it. By leaving that hot spot.
Oh, man. I know, because I once actually had forgotten that I had gone... I was, like, running around in the light world, and then I'm like, how did I get here? And I'm, like, looking on the map, and it actually shows you on the map where it is. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, my God, it's way over there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, man, I must have taken, like, the bird, or... I don't even know, but I'm like, oh, man, it's going to take me forever to get over there.
Go back,
To get to the same spot. And I later realized there's probably places that I could, teleport with existing teleporters. But there's several places that are like little mysteries to me, and I'm really curious about, getting into them. And then I got to dive back into Spirit Tracks. And then Breath of the Wild, after I ship this next game I'm working on, I'm going to clear some time in my schedule for that. So it'll be a year of a lot of Zelda.
I'm definitely going to finish Link Between Worlds. And I might actually restart Ocarina on the 3DS because they have a special version.
That's good. Yep.
Yeah.
How many times will that be for you?
This will be the 4th attempt. Actually finishing it.
Oh, it's good times. All right, well then that is it for us tonight. You can find us on Twitter at Brett_Duville and
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
The podcast can be found at DevGameClub. You can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. And yeah, keep those iTunes ratings and reviews coming. There were a good number this week. There was maybe close to 10, I think.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and that just warms our heart. And we will catch up with them. Yeah, we like to read them online and talk about them and how they tie into our mission here and all that stuff. So we will try to get to that, to get to more of them next time. But we had some meaty emails to get through as well. So keep sending them, and we'll keep reading them. Thanks so much, and good night.
Good night.
I was going to throw it over to you, Tim. Are you still with me? You're not still with me.